Alright, before creating the shader, what I want to do is to write some geometry output in a file node so we can avoid the necessary calculation time when we will go back and forth inside the containers. So let's drop down a file cache node. We will change the file path to explicit and we will point it to the location where we want to save the file. In this case, I want to be in my IP folder and inside the geo folder. We will call it rock platform.bgeo. Also change the evaluate as single file, we don't want a file sequence, and click on save file. So your bgeo file will be saved and now it's loaded from the disk every time. Also, let's rename this null to rock platform to be consistent and go outside. Here what we want to do is to organize things to keep them separated between modeling and rendering. So let's rename this one to rock platform. This is the node that contains all my setup, so I will mark it as green and I will use all the nodes in black to render. So let's create a new geo container, make it black, and we will call it rocks rndr for render. Then we go inside and drop down an object merge. This will point to the output of our rock platform. So it was out underscore rock platform and accept. Now we can go outside and turn off the blue flag for the setup node. Next, let's create a camera. Make it full HD, so here like this, and let's change the camera and lock it to frame the rock. Then we need some light to test it, so let's drop down a dome light. You can use, of course, whatever lighting setup you want. I will use a dome light for now to test my material, then we will move on the actual lighting setup. So I will use this Colorful Studio. You can download it for free from HDRI Haven. So let's accept. And to hide it in the viewport, you uncheck enable in viewport. To hide it in render, you uncheck background here in the environment tab. I want both of those be disabled. Lastly, we need to create the material. So let's go into the material tab and drop down a Redshift material builder. We want to rename it as rocks, and inside we already have some standard node. Let's select it and put the reflection to 0 for now. Finally, let's assign this material to our rocks rndr, so rocks. And finally, on the Redshift tab, click here to create the render node. As you can see, I already have one duplicated, so I will delete it, all of it, and recreate it as one. In here, by default, Redshift with the latest release basically came out with some default value that are way too high for testing purpose. So go on the Redshift tab, switch the mode to advanced, and we want to turn off automatic sampling and leave the default to 4 and 16 for now. Also disable the global illumination. We won't use GI for this scene. So now if we launch our first render, let's see what we get. Alright, we have our rock, we have our material, and the light is working. So now we can actually create the shader for it. So go back into the material context and inside the material. The technique we are going to use to create the shader is by layer and mix a bunch of these Maxon noises here. If you drop down one, you can see that you have a bunch of parameters, and on the type tab you have a lot of different noises. My advice is to try those out, because with all these different type of noises you can basically achieve whatever kind of effect you want, so try those out. Now, to quickly have a preview of what this noise is doing to our mesh, we can plug the out color of the noise directly into the surface input and refresh the rendering if you don't get update. Basically this will give us no shader information, just a flat surface, but it's super fast and it's perfect to quickly see the noise. Now for the first noise we want to change the type to FBM, and we want to increase the scale to something like let's say 5.2, so we have low frequency noises. And then we want to stack on this noise another FBM, so let's duplicate this one and replace the input so we can see it. And we want this one to be even higher, so let's put 10 on the overall scale. Now if we zoom in, you can see that we have not so much details on this one, and we can increase the detail by increasing the octaves parameter. So let's put like 20 and we immediately got some details back. Now the way we are going to layer those noises is with this Redshift color layer node. So let's drop down one. In here you have all the input for your base layer and all the layer that goes above it, and inside you have the control for the transparency of each layer, the blending mode, which are the same you can find in Photoshop or After Effects, and you can also enable or disable the layer. Now we want to plug the first noise into the base color and plug the out color into the surface. The reason we see all black is because we have no input for the other layers, but by default the layer 1 is already enabled, so it's taking this black color as input. What we want to do is to plug the second noise into the layer 1 color. And now if we lower the transparency, you can see that we have the first noises and then we are adding the second noise on top of it. But what we want to change is the blend mode. We want to set this one as overlay and maybe lower the opacity a little bit, something like 0.78. So we have mixed the first two noises of our shader. So now we have some black and white values, and we want to use those in combination with a Redshift ramp node. We want to take the color layer and make it as an input for the ramp, and the ramp will go on the base color of the shader. So let's plug the ramp into the base color and the out color into the surface. In this way we are using those black and white values to drive the color of our rock. So let's say we want our light parts to be some gray value, let's say something like this, and for the dark part we want some blue value, something like this. And also we want to add maybe some darker value here, let's say at 0.2, and we want something like this. So we have some basic coloration, and we still haven't done with the basic noise. We have to layer a lot more of those. Now back to the noises. Let's rename these two so we can easily recognize the nodes when we will have a complex setup. So FBM, the first one was the high frequency, the second one was the low frequency. And let's open a render. Now what I want to introduce is something like an horizontal noise. So let's take another maximum noise, plug it directly into the surface so we can have a quick feedback. And we want to use this Naki pattern for this operation. Then in the input we can lower the frequency on the Y scale, so let's say 0.1, and increase the overall scale to some quite big value, let's say 6.5. So I can have this horizontal pattern going on. Now we can use this as the second layer color, so layer 2 color as an input, and replace the shader back. And in the Redshift color layer we just need to enable the layer 2. Now we are seeing only that. We change the blend mode and we want to use multiply this time, and lower the opacity quite a bit, let's say 0.35, so it's not too strong, because we want to use another horizontal noise on it. So let's rename this one to horizontal, and for the other horizontal noise I want to create, let's plug it to the surface. I want to exaggerate this effect even more, so leaving the noise type to the default noise, on the input tab let's put some crazy value for the X, like 300, and also for the Z. Also lower the overall scale, let's say 0.4, so it will be an even more strong horizontal effect, but right now it's too straight. And the way we can distort a noise is by using another noise, so let's drop down another maximum noise, and we use this noise to distort the other one. So let's plug for a second this one, and we will set this one as a default noise, and on the input tab let's increase the overall scale to 10, and maybe we can lower this value, let's say 0.5, 0.2 for the Y, and 0.5 for the Z. So it's just a really simple noise, like a purling or a simple noise, but the thing is we are going to use this pattern to drive this other pattern. So let's say we save this snapshot to see the comparison, and let's plug the first noise into the chord offset input of the second one. Now if you hit render again, you can see that the noise has been distorted according to the other noise pattern. Let's save also the snapshot, and you can see the difference here. So let's quickly delete those, and now we want to use this as a layer 3 color. So let's replace also the standard material, and inside the color layer let's enable layer 3. Now we see only the last noises, and we want this one to be in overlay. I believe even the default opacity of 1 is good, and maybe let's also change the second layer to overlay, because it was too strong with multiply. Now for the final layer of this first layering operation, I want to create some small dark spot on the rock. So let's rename this other noise to distorted, and we want to drop down another maximum noise, connect it to the surface as always, and for this one we want to set it as turbulence. So let's find turbulence, and let's play with the scale value. So let's lower it to something like 0.32, and also on the output tab let's increase this slow clip. This will start to clip your dark value, so let's set it quite high. We want a high contrast for these dark spots. Let's say something like this. And right now I like the shape of the spots, but they are too much, so we can use another noise and filter those spots. So let's duplicate this one, let's plug it to the surface, and the type is also fine as turbulence, but we want to change the scale. So let's say something really high, and lower the low clip, maybe also tweak the brightness, and we can increase a little bit the octaves to have some more details in it. Now we want to mix these two noises, and we want to use a Redshift color composite node. So let's plug the base color and the blend color, replace the surface, and now if we set the composite mode to multiply, basically the second noise is filtering the first one by a multiply operation. So now we can plug this color composite into the layer 4. It will be the final layer for our first layering operation. Let's replace the standard material, and we want to set the layer 4 enabled, also those, set it to multiply this time. Now it's basically working, but you see a weird effect, because as now it's all black with the light spot, and we are using multiply, so it actually needs to be the reverse of it. So to reverse the incoming value, let's just use a Redshift color invert node after the composite. Now let's zoom in and tweak the values to get some details back. So let's maybe lower the height clip on the first noise, and also increase the octave, let's say 10, so we have some details back. On the second noise, let's try to increase the brightness. You just need to tweak the values until you get something you like. This is the basic concept of it. After you have something that you might like, let's plug the invert into the layer 4 base color. Replace the material. Now this is what we had until now. Let's render with this button and save the snapshot. Now enable the fourth layer and set it to multiply and see the difference. As you can see, it's not a big deal, it's just some random dark spots on the rock, but as I said before, little things really matters at the end of the day. So let's rearrange things a little bit. We want all this to be organized, so let's make a network box with this stuff, and let's call it base details. So next we want to add some white or whitish spots all over the rock, like it's going to be some mold or fungus that has grown on it. And as usual, drop down a max on noise and plug it to the surface. So let's see, we want this to be an FBM one. We immediately want to increase the octaves to 10, so we have a nice detail, and let's zoom a little bit. Now let's open the input and output parameters, and right away increase the contrast all the way to 1, increase the low clip, let's say something like 0.46, and increase the overall scale by a lot, let's say 10. Now, just like before, I want to filter this noise a little bit, so let's drop down a color layer node and duplicate this noise. Let's plug the second one to the surface. So for the second one, we want to have even more octaves, and drop down the scale to 1 and the low clip also. So now plug the first noise into the base color and the second one in the layer 1. Plug the color layer into the surface, and on the color layer let's change the mode to multiply. So from the first noise we are subtracting the second one, and we want to do it another time. So let's copy the noise and plug it into the layer 2 color. And for the second one we want to have even lower frequency, so let's say 0.5, and of course we have to enable this and change the mode to multiply. And back on the second noise, let's put the low clip back to 0 and maybe decrease the contrast a little bit so it won't be subtracted as the same value as the previous noise. So now, same as the previous layering operation, we want this color layer to end into a ramp. So we can remap the color, and I want this to be from black to a slightly green color. Let's say something like this. And both of this ramp, let's replace the standard material. Both of this ramp will go into another color layer operation. So we have the base color, and we will have this second layer that will be our white spots. So let's plug it into the color layer 1 color and plug the out color into the base color of our shader. Now here, if we disable the layer 1, we have just the first layering operation. Let's enable the layer 1 and change the blend mode to screen. Now let's lower the opacity, let's say 0.6, and we just added the bright spots on our rock. So same as before, let's organize this thing, create a network box and call it white spots. So lastly, for as it concerns for the base color, I want to create some edge dirt, and we can create it with this Redshift curvature node. Let's plug it into the surface and let's render to see what it is. As you can see, it gives you bright value where you have a night curvature value on your mesh and dark values where you have flat surface. So we want to set it really low, something like 0.006. And same as before, we want to filter this out with a couple of noises. So let's drop down a color layer node. We will use the curvature as a base color and drop down a maximum noise. Plug it to the layer 1 color and replace the color layer into the surface. So let's see, for this noise, let's try this Booyah one. And on the output tab, let's change the brightness and the contrast until we have something like this. Then in the color layer node, change the blend mode to multiply. So we are starting to filter this curvature effect a little bit. Now let's drop down another maximum noise, plug it to the layer 2, and of course enable it. And for the noise we want, let's try the FBM and maybe increase contrast and brightness, maybe not the brightness, just the contrast. Also change this mode to multiply, so we are filtering the curvature even more. And now this color layer will go into another ramp, so let's plug it here. This time let's say from black to, why not, something like bluish, and this will go into the layer 2 of our final color layering operation. So let's plug the shader back and hit the render button. Now on the color layer node, let's enable the layer 2 and change the mode to screen like before. And of course right now it's too much, so let's lower it to some value like 0.35. So we introduce some edge wear or dirt, whatever you want to call it. Now if you see on the curvature node, you have a mode parameter that right now is set to convex. This means that you have the curvature effect only on the convex angles of your mesh, not on the concave one. And this is good for the edge awareness, but I also want to introduce some darker value in the concave curvature parts. So let's rearrange things a little bit. This will be our edge wear. And for the concave part, we just want to add a fourth layer on this color layer node. So let's drop down another redshift curvature. Let's plug it to the surface and lower the radius, let's say 0.1, and this time choose concave. So let's plug it to a ramp, and we really just want to invert this ramp, so the dark value will be on the concave part. We want to plug this to our layer 3 color and replace the shader back. Now on the color layer, let's enable layer 3 and set it to multiply. So we introduce the dark areas. Now we just need to lower the opacity a little bit, let's say 0.45. And basically we are done with the base color of our rock. Now we are going to take care of the roughness and bump channel for this rock, and we are actually going to reuse some of the layering operation we already did. But I want to specify that this is to keep things simple for tutorial purposes. In a production environment you will end up with shader much more complex than this. So for the roughness, let's drop down another color layer node, and our base roughness will be the result of our first layering operation where we have the base detail. So let's plug it to the base color of the new color layer node. Disable the layer 1 for now, and let's plug it to the surface. Now this will be our main roughness, but I actually want to drop down a color change range node, because the roughness, as you may already know, is driven by a black and white value, and if you have full white or full black values, it means that your surface is 0 or 100% reflective. This will look weird, so we actually want to change the range to something like 0.1 on all the channel and 0.8. So now let's plug the shader back, and the color range will end up in the reflection roughness channel. Now let's put the reflection weight back to 1, and we should have some roughness value, as you can see from the rendering. On top of the base roughness, we want to add the white spot. I want the white spot to be less reflective. So take the white spot resulting operation and plug it to the layer 1 of our roughness layering operation. Now let's enable the layer 1, and just for a second let's plug the color range result to the surface. So now we want to change the layer 1 mode to add. So the white spot are added on top of the base roughness, and white means is less reflective. So this is exactly what we wanted. So let's plug the shader back. Now let's maybe frame some part with some white spot so we can see the result. That's maybe here. Yeah, we have less reflection, but that's too much. Let's lower the layer 1 value to something like this. Let's see. Yeah, I would say it's better. Now we need to take care of the bump map. So let's drop down a bump map Redshift node, and let's plug the output on the bump map channel of the shader. For the input of the bump, we want to use the base detail. So let's take the output of the layering operation and let's plug it to the input of the bump map. And let's see what we have. By default, as you can see, the bump map is way too high. So let's go on the bump map node and let's decrease the scale by a lot. Something like 0.06 will be fine. So it's definitely better, but I believe we do have some issue. Yeah, and it's probably caused by the darker spots of our base detail. So I did some general tweaking. If you want to have the same setting I have, now I will quickly review each noise we have in the setup. So for the first FBM, I actually lowered the contrast quite a bit to negative 0.5, and also I added some offset value to the various noises, so you have some variancy on top of that. For the second FBM, I also lowered the contrast a little bit, and for the horizontal noise I tweaked the offset also. I believe I also changed the seed to have a different pattern, and for the two noises for the dark spots, I actually set the high clip to 1 and the low clip to, let's say, 0.6. Let's round this value. And the second one, let's say 0.38 for the low clip and 0.02 negative for the brightness. And maybe as a final thing, I actually want to add those white spots to the bump map. So let's take the base detail and plug it to the base color and take the white spot to the second one. Let's change the mode to screen and maybe set the mask to 0.2 and replace the bump input. Now let's hit render again. Alright, let's say I'm happy with the result, so the next thing will be to reuse all this shading setup and also the modeling one to create the other rocks we need for the scene.